Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, one event that this is passing under the radar is a very serious political crisis that's developing in the very small but important state of Armenia. Um, Nikol Pashinyan, the Armenian Prime Minister since 2018, has managed to go from one massive loss after another. He basically lost the war against Azerbaijan in 2020, then basically presided over the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh in 2023. Now it looks like he's about to cave to Azerbaijan's demand that the Azeri exclave of Nakhchivan be linked through the Zangezur corridor to Azerbaijan proper, which essentially will nullify the state of Armenia, and particularly as essentially this will be used by Turkey to create a kind of Turkish trade corridor through Armenia into Azerbaijan and, of course, into the Caucasus and Central Asia. So this is a Turkey dream. And Pashinyan is making nice with Turkey. He visited Turkey the other day. But all of it is driven by this goal of joining the EU and presumably joining NATO. So he's distanced himself from Russia. Now, all of this has led to Pashinyan's extreme unpopularity, understandably, within.
Yeah, because it's a lose, 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 lose,
Yeah,
lose. I don't.
yes, yeah. And so now Pashinyan's in a quite ferocious fight with the Armenian Apostolic Church, which is a
Mistake.
very ancient church. It's been around, I think, since the fifth century, and it, it's absolutely at the core of Armenian national identity. So he has now been arresting leading archbishops of the Armenian Apostolic Church and accusing them of organizing coups and plotting against him. Needless to say, we haven't heard anything from the OSCE, we haven't heard anything from the EU, European Court of Human Rights, or anything else. You think this is quite a serious event when an Armenian prime minister attacks the church, the church of his country, and starts arresting religious leaders. Um, but he's going ahead with this, and if you look at some of these recent stories, there's some aspects of it are quite bizarre. Here you have this is a headline from the BBC. Armenia's PM offers to expose himself in escalating church row.
Well, that's a very interesting title.
It says a bitter standoff between Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and the Armenian Apostolic Church has seen mass arrests, allegations of a coup plot, and an extraordinary offer by Armenia's leader to reveal his private parts to prove he's a Christian.
Oh, so apparently it is an appropriate title. Excuse me.
It is appropriate, yes. And here it was earlier this week, Pashinyan told his 1.1 million followers on Facebook he was prepared to expose himself to the head of the Armenian church and his spokesman to prove they were wrong that he had been circumcised. Um,
Wow.
and social media became his preferred means of communication after he came to office after Armenia's so-called Velvet Revolution. And then Pashinyan faces pivotal elections next year, and the church has become a prominent anti-government voice since Armenia was defeated in the 2020 war with neighboring Azerbaijan. And so you have to think about this. This election is next year. I have to think this is preparation for canceling that election. They're just going to say we can't hold the election because the church is plotting against us.
Well, the church is not happy with the government's policy, calling it
Yeah,
anti-government. That's what the BBC
right,
does.
exactly.
But the church is reflecting, in my opinion, and I know a lot of Armenians, reflecting the public will, and not, and is that contrary to the government? Yes, but is its purpose to be anti-government? That's a different question.
Right. That's right.
Anyway, the Armenian church has existed under just about every
Right.
imaginable political, formulation, and
Right.
they keep going on. The church is eternal, and I mean it, eternal among Armenians.
Yes. Yes. And they're not very happy with this making nice with Erdogan. I mean, it's not like they're getting anything out of Turkey. Turkey clearly, I mean, this is for Turkey a transport hub. They want to go from Nakhchivan through the Zangezur corridor into Azerbaijan. This is Turkey's dream. What remains of Armenia after that? His extraordinary offer last Monday followed a Facebook post by a priest in the southwestern town of Masis who alleged Pashinyan had been circumcised, comparing him to Judas and implying he was not a Christian. I
Okay,
believe.
clerics, priests, bishops, these churches are not monolithic, okay? They're not Bolshevik in their orientation. You're always going to get priests and clerics,
Right.
that say that doesn't mean it represents the church.
Yeah, I agree.
Always keep that in mind.
Right, exactly. I believe that our Apostolic Holy Church must immediately cleanse itself, said Father Zaruch Ashurian, of the false believers who have betrayed the nation, dishonored the memory of their ancestors, violated the baptism, and replaced the seal of the Holy Cross with a sign of circumcision. The confrontation between church and state began at the end of May when the Prime Minister accused the head of the Armenian Apostolic Church, Catholicos Karekin II, of breaking his vow of celibacy and fathering a child, demanding the church leader's replacement.
What business is that of the state?
Exactly. That's exactly right. The church released a statement accusing Pashinyan of undermining Armenia's spiritual unity, but did not address the claim about the child. Um,
Well, if such a thing happened, that is for the church to resolve.
right,
Okay.
right. But I am, to be honest, a little puzzled by this because I thought in the Orthodox Church there was no demand of priestly celibacy. So I'm not sure why this is such a big issue. Um, the government affiliated media subsequently circulated photos and names of Karekintu's alleged daughter, while Pashinyan established a coordination group to organize the election of a new church leader. This is all very strange. First of all, why is the government circulating photos of this alleged daughter and establishing a coordination group to organize the election of a new church leader? I mean, how does the government organize the election of a new church leader?
Well, geez, even Stalin didn't do that in Catholic
Exactly,
schools.
even Stalin didn't do that. Despite constitutional provisions guaranteeing separation of church and state. Yeah, yeah, there are these
The
constitutional provisions.
church is eternal.
Right,
This this gu- this iteration of the Armenian nation state, of all countries in the world, it's been in flux for a
right,
long time,
right.
George.
That's right, exactly. Um, and then it says when Karekin II returned from a trip to the UAE last week, hundreds of supporters gathered at Yerevan airport, chanting Vehepa Pontiff. He called for unity and restraint, said they would overcome the difficulty together. The crisis then escalated on Wednesday when security services detained 16 people, including Archbishop Bagrat Galstanyan, a senior cleric who leads the opposition Sacred Struggle movement. They face allegations of plotting terrorist acts to seize power. So you're now
Yes.
moving into a very different realm.
Yeah, I mean, allegations of plotting terrorist that.
Yeah,
Okay, I mean, we're not talking about, a interpretation of Genesis here.
right,
Okay,
exactly. Plotting terrorist acts and arresting an archbishop.
not
Um,
a good thing to do. Not a,
yeah, yeah. Among others detained are an opposition member, former MP, a businessman, and a blogger. And it says Armenia's investigative committee alleges the group planned to establish 250 assault groups of 25 members, each to carry out attacks and cause mass disturbances, and that a large quantity of items and objects intended for criminal activity were found during the searches. Now, again, one has to wonder, well, if there's an election next year,
Yeah,
why
oh
the
yeah.
need for a
Oh
coup?
yeah, there's an election next year. George, this has been going on in Moldova, this has
Right,
been going on in Romania, this has been going on in Germany. I
right.
mean, well, I give it to the Armenians. They're not very inventive, but they copy well.
That's right, exactly, exactly. And that's why you have to think this is all, you're laying the groundwork for canceling the elections next year.
Or canceling certain politicians,
For canceling
canceling
politicians,
parties.
exactly.
Well, they did it in the EU,
Yes,
that
right,
bastion
exactly.
of freedom and justice. They did it in the EU. We can do it.
That's
Hey,
right.
maybe if we do it, we'll get into the EU.
That's it. Exactly. And it is striking that there's been no word from the EU about this. The Archbishop led major anti government protests last year, and the court has now ruled that he should spend 2 months in pre-trial detention. Well, that's nice. He faces charges of planning terrorism and attempting to overthrow the state. And then the arrest followed the publication of what government affiliated media claimed was a detailed opposition coup plan, allegedly involving the church, a recently detained Russian Armenian billionaire Samvel Karapetyan, and two former presidents, Robert Kocharian and Serge
Well, there's
Sargsyan.
Kacharian. I met him a number of times.
Right, yeah, he's been around for, yeah, it's been a long time. Pashinyan shared a montage of the photos of the four men and said that the event would remain a history of a failed revolution of crooks.
As if he doesn't have other problems to deal with. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
I mean, you think of the staggering failures. I mean, his the failure of the 2020 war with Azerbaijan. Why was Armenia so unprepared for that war? And then why was it unprepared for the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh in 2023? It's all on him.
And he pissed off the Russians in
And
the
he pissed
process.
off the Russians.
This guy.
um, and then Samvel Karapetyan, who holds dual Russian and Armenian citizenship, is one of the richest men in Armenia with an estimated wealth of $4 billion. He owns the Tashir Group, known across Russia for its pizza brand. It's a conglomerate that operates real estate as well as the electric networks of Armenia, a major energy distributor in the country. Karapetyan, one of the most prominent benefactors of the Armenian Apostolic Church and the recipient of high church awards, was arrested after he made a public video pledging his support for the church.
Wow, that's what a
That's a good
dissident,
one.
what a radical that guy is.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
being
So
in Armenia saying you support the church, that's like breathing air.
that's right. That's right. So he gets arrested. Um, Nothing like political freedom. And then he says, I've always stood with the Armenian church and the Armenian people. If the politicians do not succeed, we will intervene in our own way in this campaign against the church, he warned. Hours after the statement, law enforcement officers conducted searches in Karapetyan's mansion. He was arrested and later charged with publicly calling for the seizure of power, which that sentence doesn't look like he's calling for a seizure of power. If the politicians do not succeed, we will intervene in our own way in this campaign against the church. So he's basically, we will intervene against the campaign against the church. That's what he's objecting to. So if Pashinyan is the one who kind of launched this attack against the church. He starts making these accusations against the head of the church, claiming that he has this illegitimate child. And then he starts these arresting these archbishops. And then
threatening to expose himself in
that's a
public.
threat to expose himself. Anyway, the prime minister later announced his intention to nationalize Karapetyan's electric networks of Armenia, and he told a Camden meeting the government would start taking control of it. Where's the money going to come from? I mean, if you're going to nationalize something, you've got to come up with some money. I mean, that's if it's the entire electrical grid, that's some serious money that the Armenian government is going to have to come up with. I mean, they could, of course, seize it, but if he seizes it, then that creates problems for him in his EU application. They can't really very well endorse property theft. I mean, they can when it comes to with Russia, but they can't have an EU member state that just carries out property theft on its territory.
And you want the government to run the electrical grid, considering the incompetence
Right,
of the government. Okay.
right,
I'm not supporting this guy, one way or another.
right,
But it's an ongoing concern. Presumably,
right,
he's doing a reasonable job.
right. Exactly. We must do this swiftly and effectively, Pashinyan said, because you do everything swiftly and effectively. Following Karapetyan's arrest, giant billboards with his photos appeared in Moscow, and Russia's Armenian diaspora expressed support for the billionaire.
I've noticed it's a very Armenian thing. They're really into the big men, the saviors, the great men. It's very much part of their culture.
Right,
They're actually far less interested in politics than the fate of these families,
right,
these rich families. It's a
right.
it's a huge soap opera.
Yes. It's a very
And
small
that's why they're
country.
talking about illegitimate children,
Right.
prime minister exposing themselves. It's part of that drama. It's all drama. It's drama driven.
That's right. That's it. Yeah. It's a very small country. Yeah, it's hard to believe I mean, I guess it's because of the Armenian diaspora, which is very influential, but still a tiny country.
Oh, the remittances. I bet
Right.
I'd like to put that up against GDP. I
Right.
think it would be eye-popping, eye-popping.
Right. Right. So this is a story from Al Arabiya. Armenia arrests another top cleric over an alleged coup plot. And it says on Friday, security forces faced off with crowds at the headquarters of the Armenian Apostolic Church outside Yerevan as they tried to arrest Ajapahyan. Ayapahyan, I guess. Videos circulating on social media showed clergymen jostling with police while bells of a nearby cathedral rang out. After Armenia's National Security Service urged Ayapahyan to appear before authorities, local media showed him entering the building of Armenia's investigative committee in his gray robes. I have never hidden, and I'm not going to hide now, Ayapahyan told reporters. I say that what is happening now is lawlessness. I have never been, and I'm not a threat to this country. The main threat is in the government. So it's another archbishop under arrest. And then it says last year, tens of thousands of demonstrators called for Pashinyan's ouster after Armenia agreed to hand over control of several border villages to Azerbaijan and to normalize relations between the neighbors and bitter rivals.
So to counteract all of these failures, he's taking on the church. Yeah,
That's right.
wow, wow.
Sure to win in popularity. On Wednesday, authorities arrested Archbishop Bagrat Galstanyan, who leads the Sacred Struggle opposition movement. He was accused of plotting a sabotage campaign to overthrow Pashinyan. And then members of Sacred Struggle, which has bitterly opposed the handover of the border villages, accused the government of cracking down on political rights. Although the territorial concessions was the movement's core issue, it has expanded to a wide array of complaints about Pashinyan. And then they talk also here about this.
Well, it's interesting, George. I think your thesis is correct, is that they know that the Sacred Struggle opposition movement and other movements are gaining in popularity, rapidly
Right.
increasing in popularity. So what's the best thing to do? Avoid
Right.
the election.
I think so. I think so. And Romania has blazed a trail in this. I mean, you just cancel an election and then you just rig and rig and rig until you hold an election and then the desired candidate wins and then everybody hails this as a triumph of democracy. And then Pashinyan has recently sought normalization of relations with Azerbaijan. Last week, he also visited Azerbaijan's top ally, Turkey, to mend the historic rift. I mean, he's got all these crises at home, and then he's sort of, oh, I better go to Turkey to mend the historic rift. Turkey and Armenia have a more than a century-old dispute over the deaths of an estimated 1.5 million Armenians in massacres, deportations, and forced marches that began in 1915 in Ottoman Turkey.
Interesting. They won't call it by its
No, no,
no name. They genocide.
that's right, exactly. Forced marches. Yeah, well, just you know,
Everyone. I've asked this many times for my good Turkish friends, and I have them. I just say, why do you struggle with this issue? It was the
right,
Ottomans that did
right,
it.
right, right,
Well, why don't you just say it was the former regime?
right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, 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 they'll never
No,
do
no, no,
that.
no, no, no,
No,
no.
no. Historians widely view the event as genocide. Turkey vehemently rejects the label, conceding that many died in that era, but insisting the death toll is inflated and resulted from civil unrest.
Unrest. Okay.
Um, anyway, attempts to impeach Pashinyan were unsuccessful, although territorial concessions were a core issue for the sacred struggle. It has expanded to a wide array of complaints about Pashinyan as the Apostolic Church's relationship with the government deteriorated. And then here again, this stuff about the illegitimate child. And then here's Reuters. Armenian arrests Archbishop over alleged coup plot, and they talk about that this Archbishop Galstanian, along with 13 other people, charged them with orchestrating a plot to overthrow the government. And then Pashinyan wrote on his Telegram channel that the authorities had thwarted a large and sinister plot by the criminal oligarchic clergy to take power in Armenia.
Criminal oligarchic clergy.
Oligarch, exactly.
That's a new one. That's a new
But
one.
Gastanian's arrest is part of a growing confrontation between Pashinyan and the powerful Armenian Apostolic Church, and then
Before you go, Joe, it's one thing that's kind of not there, that's not mentioned, but we would usually suspect, but they're not playing a certain card here, the Russia card.
you're absolutely right. It's something that I was also wondering, my view is that, well, that's coming, but maybe there's something else here. Why isn't the Russia card being
There's just too
played?
many Armenians in Russia, and those remittances and things like that. That's not the same kind of hostility, and particularly since the failed attempts vis-a-vis Azerbaijan and Turkey, they're kindred brothers,
Right,
and that's bringing them the population
right,
society, not these kooks that are
right,
Western sponsored. But I mean, it's more of a cultural, social thing is that, and Armenia has always had this besieged mentality.
right.
And now you want to piss off the Russians even more?
Right, but it is interesting because I looked at TASS, and TASS, just had a comment from Peskov. Hey, this is an internal Armenian matter. We're not getting involved in internal Armenian politics. But I thought it would be interesting because they don't have to get involved in Armenian politics, so they could still comment. Hey, we don't really like persecution of church leaders. We don't like attacking clerics. That's not a good look. For in any country that deems itself civilized. But they didn't even say that. Just well, it's an internal
Yeah,
um,
well, that's
Armenian matter.
but that's probably understandable since the Russians have been burned a number of
Right,
number of times over the last
right,
few years, and I think they're looking at a lot of caution here
right.
because blaming the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh on Russia, that really pissed off the Kremlin.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
we never guaranteed that.
Right, right,
Okay, we helped,
right.
but we're not the arbiters of this, and we're not going to be pulled into it.
Right. No, that's right. But curiously enough, Pashinyan still maintains some kind of I don't know, relations with the Kremlin. He showed up on May the 9th So even though he is withdrawn from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, he nonetheless showed up on May the 9th. So Russia still maintains some level of cordiality with Pashinyan. They haven't exactly just banished him, and said, hey, we want nothing further to do with you. So he's still part of the so to speak, the group of nations that accept a certain level of Russian leadership. After all,
Well, I mean, he can't be too picky these days,
no,
you
he
know.
can't be too
And I
picky.
think that shows how magnanimous the Russians are.
Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right, because he has withdrawn from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and this reconciliation with Azerbaijan. I mean, it's just capitulation. I mean, it's not
Oh,
it's
yeah.
capitulation. It's being organized by the EU. It's France and Germany that presiding over this capitulation. And he Pashinyan has chosen to go down this path. Meeting. I mean, he's getting nothing for this. It's one capitulation after another to Azerbaijan. I mean, I don't know what Armenia is getting out of this. Um, anyway, and then again they talk here about this Russian Armenian billionaire Karapetyan was detained on accusations of making public calls to usurp power after he accused the government of waging a campaign against the church and said he would act in his own way to stop it. What's wrong with that? Why can't you you know protest a government campaign against the church? He's a major benefactor to the church. I mean, billionaires don't just hand out a lot of money unless they're getting something out of it, or if they care, a lot about something. And if they give it to a church, that means they have to care a great deal about the church.
Well, I mean, he loves his Arme he identifies as Armenian.
Yeah, exactly.
And what better way to express that than the best way to do that is to support the church.
Yeah,
That's what they
exactly.
all have, the single thing they have in common.
That's right. Exactly. And then here, tapping into popular anger over defeats and territorial concession, Galstanyan and his supporters led days of streets of protest last summer to demand the removal of Pashinyan. De Detailing the charges he faces now, authorities allege that Galstanyan and his associates had recruited over 1,000 people, mainly former soldiers and police officers, to block roads, paralyze traffic, incite violence, and shut off the internet with the goal of destabilizing the government. So that's the terrorist plot that
No, it shows me they're down in the polls. I'm sorry.
exactly, exactly. And then the investigative committee published audio recordings purporting to show that doesn't sound very convincing. If even Reuters it says purporting to show Galstanyan and others discussing plans for the alleged coup attempt, as well as a photograph showing firearms and other weapons they said were discovered during searches. I always love photographs of armed weapons. Oh well, look, here are some pistols. Great,
George,
pistols.
it's isn't this ringing the bell of the German monarchists?
Exactly. I was thinking about that as well. The German monarchists. Yeah, that trial. That's kind of
Oh
the
God.
exactly. Pashinyan, who faces parliamentary elections in June 2026, so that's in less than a year's time, has moved towards signing a peace treaty with Azerbaijan, although tensions between the two countries remain high, and the number of reported ceasefire violations has surged this year. And then here's a Radio Free Europe. Move to arrest another Armenian archbishop sparks brawl as church standoff escalates. And here, masked Armenian police were thwarted by clergy and church supporters who blocked agents as they attempted to detain an senior Armenian Apostolic Church cleric. As a standoff between authorities and the church escalates, police and officers from the Armenia's National Security Service arrived at the Mother See of Holy Echmiadzin to detain Archbishop Mikhail Ayapahyan,
What a
primate.
what a bad look.
Not a
Jeez.
good look. No, 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 no.
Can you imagine much worse? Come
It's
on.
worse. I mean, you got police officers, police and officers from the Armenia's National Security Service arrive at the Mother See of Holy Echmiadzin to detain an archbishop, the primate of the Shirak diocese. It's not a good look. And as you say, particularly the importance of the Armenian Apostolic Church to the nation's identity. The nation has survived. I mean, they actually survived. And there aren't many of them left, but they somehow survive, and the church is a part of that national survival. He is accused of making public statements more than a year ago that authorities say constituted a call to seize power and forcibly overthrow Armenia's constitutional order. And then the move came days after the investigative committee detained Archbishop Bakarat Galstanian, who led massive and largely peaceful protests. And then the outspoken Ayapahyan rejected the accusations, described what was happening as absolutely legal. I'm not a threat to this country. The threat is sitting in the government. I have never hidden, and I'm not going to hide now. I do not want to create the impression of hiding behind my brethren. They came after me, I will go. And then the Catholicos of all Armenians, Garegin II, the head of the church, was also on site during the standoff with law enforcement officers. So he's on site. The head of the church was on site during this arrest. And then
Even Stalin didn't do this stuff, everyone.
that's right. Representatives of the clergy and said that Ayapahyan had intended to comply with police orders and allow himself to be taken into custody, but was repeatedly prevented from doing so because people would not let him in. Later, the lawyer and the archbishop lawyer said the archbishop was voluntarily heading to the investigative committee. I'm not afraid of anything. The accusation is completely fabricated. And then it also followed the arrest of Karapetyan, and legal authorities construed the statement as a threat to the politicians. Failed and they construed the statement as a threat to overthrow the government, and so on. And then the latest actions against senior Armenian clergymen come amid a broader standoff between the government and the church that took a dramatic turn several weeks ago after the prime minister began accusing the clergy of breaching their vows of celibacy.
Oh, Jesus.
In particular, claiming that to be acting as a Christian rather than a state official, Pashinyan accused Garegin II of fathering a child, called on him to resign and vacate his seat at the Holy See. And then Pashinyan threatened on June the 26th to forcibly remove Catholicos from his Echmiadzin headquarters if the supreme head of the Armenian Apostolic Church continued to ignore his demands to resign. Also, he can demand the resignation of the head of the
Well, he can demand the church the moon is made of cheese.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, but he threatens to forcibly remove Catholicos if the supreme head continues to ignore his demand to resign. Earlier, following an emergency meeting chaired by Garegin, the Church's Supreme Spiritual Council cast doubts on the credibility of the coup allegations against Galstanian. Armenia's leading opposition groups have likewise described the case as a politically motivated, dismissing Pashinyan's claims the security services have foiled a coup attempt. So that kind of gives us a sense of how this is shaping up in Armenia. I think this is they're working the Romania Moldova angle, setting this up, but
Because they can't win elections.
they can't win an election. It's clear he's very, very unpopular. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, if you preside over one humiliation after another, I mean, it's very hard to get reelected after that. So what else can they do other than, force this onslaught against the church and then coup and whatever? The election needs to be postponed.
You know, looking at this in a broad historical perspective, it's almost to the point of shocking because of all people in that part of the world, you can disappear.
Yep.
You can be erased.
Right.
And you're playing these machinations like
Right.
this?
Right.
This is just absurd.
It really is. Uh,
Do you think, going to Turkey is an act of good faith? The Turks don't care.
no,
They don't care.
no, no, no,
It's
no.
basically, you're going to do what we tell you to
Yeah.
do. Now, you can humiliate yourself. That's up to you and your people.
Right.
But Turkey and Azerbaijan collectively, they will get their way.
Yes.
Now it's up to Armenia to try to manage that. And you would need a political genius to navigate those waters, George, because they're in a tough
Very, very tough.
spot.
Because, yeah, what Turkey wants is a concession on the Zangezur corridor. He said, yeah, you got to link Nakhchivan with Azerbaijan proper, and that's going to be our transport corridor. This is the Turkish transport corridor. This is what we want. That's what Erdogan wants from him. And of course, drop all of your claims about genocide. Don't ever bring up that
No, that
subject
will
again.
go on forever. That will
Right.
go on forever.
That's right.
But see, why does Erdogan want this? Because Iran and Russia and the other BRICS countries, they're creating their own trade corridor, and Erdogan sees the
Right.
competition who's going to be able to have um, uh, hegemony or
Right.
control or whatever word you want to use. But there are big geopolitical things
Right.
going on right now. And as George always mentions when we mention Azerbaijan also, but Armenia, it's a importantly geopolitical piece of real estate.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, that's right. And of course, Israel is a part of that. Israel, with the
Yeah.
links to Turkey and Azerbaijan. So they say, hey, we got to build this the Zangezur corridor. No ands, ifs, and buts. So he's going through all of this. He's capitulated to one demand after another with to Azerbaijan. Um, but I do think that, I mean, you brought this up, and it's a very important. Russia has not appeared in these stories. Now,
Yes.
what
Very interesting.
it seems to me that Pashinyan hasn't yet gone there. Maybe he won't go there. Because he could easily say Russia is behind all of this. Russia is the one causing problems for me. He hasn't done it. He's attacking the church, but he hasn't said Russia is behind this. Now that may change. The OSCE and somebody else might intervene and say, God, Russia is trying to overthrow Pashinyan. There are plots that the Russians are
So you
fighting.
have Azerbaijan against you, you have Turkey against you, you have Israel against you. You've kind of pissed off the Russians. And then you cross the line. Then who is going to protect you?
No, no.
Who?
The
No,
only the only possibility other than Russia was Iran, but Iran's got it enough.
kind of busy, kind of busy at the
Iran's
moment.
kind of busy, exactly. So Iran, which said, "Hey, we're not going to tolerate, the Zangezur corridor. It's not going to happen." But I think that was then. This is now. I think Iran's got its problems, and but other than really, Armenia doesn't have anyone. And Pashinyan pursued a very, very bizarre policy ever since he came to power. It's hard to see the logic of
I know.
what he did. I mean, other countries have pursued color revolutions, and there was some logic to what they were doing, but essentially antagonizing Russia that didn't really make very much sense. It has to be one for the ages.
Pashinyan,
Why he did that?
he must have a fueled airplane on the tarmac because this guy he's Saigon 1975 all over him.
Right.
Okay. And he will be parachuted into the European Union and he'll be taken care of.
Yep.
He'll
Yep.
still be the prime minister. He'll always be the prime minister of Armenia.
Right.
Just like that Georgian lady.
Yeah. What was the name? Salome Zorabachvili. Yeah, that's right. And but who are after. I think she still claims to be president
Of
of
course you do.
Georgia, but now I think she's at the John McCain Institute. I think she got herself a nice fellowship there.
Madam President, here's your office. Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. You're with the John McCain Institute. So she got a nice little salary there. But yeah, maybe. I mean, clearly, he has the backing of the EU, but there's not much that they can do for him. I mean, it became
No.
clear that this was a capitulation to Azerbaijan. These negotiations under French-German auspices were just negotiations to capitulate, one after another. It's like you surrender on this, you surrender on that, and then Azerbaijan has another issue that you have. You have to change your constitution. And so it's like one after another, and he seems to go along with it all. You know.
Yeah, because the EU just doesn't have the muscle right now. It just can't. And they've actually made Armenia's situation infinitely worse. Okay. Why not just have good relations with everybody? Okay. Do your best. Muddle through. You're a small country, small population.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of global sympathy, George. Armenians have a lot of sympathy that they can garner around the world. This guy is the wrong guy.
Yes. Right.
Oh, believe me, my Armenian friends talk about this endlessly, and I don't know. Okay. But it's like I said, it's always about scandal. And did you know his wife has a Porsche and she was driving in Monaco. And then this one, his daughter she's engaged to some French guy. And I always say, is this what Armenian politics is about? She said, yeah, mostly. It's all a soap opera. And what I find really interesting is how like Reuters and Radio for You, how they through what they see through their lens, they see something that they think is in a political idiom that makes sense to us. I tend to think it's all kind of a mixture.
Right.
I think it's a lot more complicated. But I do like listening to my Armenian friends because it's so colorful and the language that they
Right.
use. Okay. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting test case of how the West will see something and how people involved in the actual events on the ground see it so very differently. It's fascinating.
Right. No, that's right. But interesting. This billionaire, this Armenian Russian billionaire Karapetyan. You know, Pashinyan had been threatening to go after him years ago. He hasn't done it because, like, I mean, yeah, it's a juicy piece of property that he has. He owns the national grid. And I think very early on, Pashinyan kind of threatened that he's going to nationalize the grid. He hasn't done it. I assume because that's a lot of money. You got to come up with some money if you're going to nationalize anything. But you can see that this is very irksome for him that there is somebody there who is very powerful, very rich, and obviously is quite influential. Now, so again, he's threatening to take away the national grid. I don't think he can do it. I think he's got enough on his plate to before seizing the national grid. So that's but Pashinyan just seems like a man staggeringly in over his head, like our friend Kevork Almasian. I mean, he says, I don't, he also says, I don't get it. I don't get what he's Pashinyan's about. Why would somebody want to weaken his country so much?
And alienate traditional friends.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
It could
So
be like, what is the EU providing him?
nothing.
What is it providing Armenia?
Right.
Okay, maybe they're getting remittances, from Europe, but it's not the European Union. Now, you could pour a lot of money into his coffers. It's not going to change anything politically. I
Right.
mean, he could become independently wealthy, I suppose, and his cronies. Everything is cronyism there. Everything. Okay. It's a laboratory test. It's just every single result is negative.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Uh,
and and, and plus, living in this part of the world for a long time, you can come up with all of the slogans you want, civilizational change, looking to the West, we're Europeans. But when you attack the church,
Yep.
none of those slogans mean anything. You say, well, you're attacking me.
Right.
Armenians wear the crucifix.
Yep.
All of them do.
Yep.
It's part of their daily attire.
Yep.
And when, you're in public transportation and you pass an Orthodox church, they all cross
Yep.
themselves. You see it all the time. They're mostly Armenian. They're mostly Armenians. They don't go there. Don't go there.
Right. It is quite extraordinary, and you're absolutely goes. It's ancient church. It's a fifth century. I mean that's quite something. And you have the Armenians. In Syria. We talked a lot about them. The ancient Armenian church there, and for him to launch this and start throwing around all these accusations, and particularly of a very vulgar kind. I mean, the vulgarity is all coming from him. He says, claiming the head of the church, he is an illegitimate child, but he's ready to expose himself, and this is really very, very sordid. And so when they say, "Hey, you're damaging the unity of the nation," well, that's exactly what he's doing. You're
That's exactly what
destroying
he's
the
doing.
unity of the nation, a tiny nation, which can't afford to have to have disunity.
Maybe there's a method to the madness, but George and I haven't tripped over it yet.
Not yet.
Okay. I think the interesting thing is you mentioned it, and I think we can wrap it on this one. Is he holding back his Russia card?
Right.
I think that's the only thing. I get two things from this. Why isn't there a Russia
Yeah.
angle that is highly profiled? We haven't been able to
Now we
explore.
looked at these several stories and no mention of Russia.
And number two, it's patently obvious that the opposition has the edge
Right.
with the upcoming election. That's why this is all happening.
Right.
Okay, because they're taking their cues from the machinations in Moldova, in Romania, in Germany, France. Okay, they're just doing their own potion here with all these elements. Okay, because they want to imprison people, they want to ban people, they want censorship, the
Right.
usual things. And like I said, they're not very inventive, but they
Right.
are copying quite well. Okay,
That's
how does it end, everyone? Not good.
no. That's right. But it's very interesting because all of those examples, Moldova, um, Ukraine, Romania, Georgia,
Georgia.
always they accuse Russia. Russia is always front and center. The Russians are plotting. The Russians are plotting. Like we talked just Salome Zorabachvili, Russians are behind me, Russia. Here, there's been no mention of Russia. Now, I assume that's simply because of Pashinyan. I think Pashinyan has enough sense not to go there and make this about Russia, but that could change. I mean, this is just simply, these are early days of this war against the church. That may say, yeah, well, now we found
Yeah,
evidence that the
but
Russians are involved in this.
But it's dicey
Right.
because if you're going to blame the Russians, then you're going to blame the church at the same time.
Yeah.
It doesn't work together. It doesn't nicely lay on top of each other because most of the people say, well, they're Pravoslavny Orthodox, we're Protestant. Why are we against these people? Plus, I have three uncles in Moscow. I mean, it's not going to
No,
work.
no. I it's more. I mean, in terms of the Western media coverage, I mean, it hasn't received that much. I mean, I covered a few stories, but it hasn't really, been featured prominently. If, however, the Russian angle were to come to the fore, I think then the Western media would pick it up and say, "Oh, whoa, the Russians they're using the church in order to overthrow Pashinyan," and that I think could happen. That so because we could just be at the beginning of
Yes.
something. So
And maybe Radio Free Europe will survive. It's a perfect story for those folks. Okay, perfect. All right, everyone. Who else? Who else is covering this?
yes,
Tell me.
no one.
Write a comment.
Yeah, yeah,
George, he did his forensic work.
yeah,
There's not a lot written about it, but he found most of it.
yeah.
And we spent a deal of time on it. No one else is talking about it. This is a very important geopolitical gambit that's
Right.
going on right now. The implications are immense, okay?
Yeah.
Immense. We mentioned Iran. It's part of the story as
Yes,
well.
it is.
And Israel.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
All right, everybody. This is the Goggle with Peter and George. We're on Local, so please go to thegoggle.locals.com. I see Buddy coming. There he is. Um, hopefully, with God's help, 3 rosaries. We'll do a live stream tomorrow at 10 o'clock Eastern time. And George is already warming up for his
So
so
3 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday, and our buddies arrived and said, "Yeah, look, you know, I had to be woken from my slumbers."
and Buddy's got heft, and I'm not
Yeah,
joking.
yeah, and
This
I
he
don't.
could be the biggest chihuahua in the world right now.
Yeah, I don't care being woken up, but now that I've woken up, I got to make a comment about the damn tip jar. I mean, it's lying there empty, dormant, useless, and it has to stop. It's intolerable, as Trump said. It has to stop. So if you have any money lying around, any dollar bills, euros, gold coins, silver, buddy likes silver, crypto, whatever, everything into the tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology. And above all, we won't have to, disturb Buddy anymore. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.